Night no longer belonged to the sky, only to the sea. Spring 1944. The Bay of Biscay lay still and gray. A German U-boat had just sounded crash dive. For its captain, 60 centimeters of seawater meant safety. Armor denser than steel. High above, a wooden Mosquito Tsetse rolled into a dive. In its nose, a 57-millimeter gun built to break that faith. The shell left the barrel, slipped beneath the surface, and kept its speed, cutting through water, through metal, through Doctrine itself. From the first glint of its tracer to the moment the hull split open, only 18 seconds passed. That morning, the Germans learned that the ocean had changed sides. This is the story of a weapon that turned water into air, and of a belief that drowned with it. For years, the German Navy had lived by one certainty, that the sea protected those who trusted it. It was not superstition, it was calculation, doctrine, and pride. Every captain was taught the same truth. 60 centimeters of seawater will stop any Allied shell. To dive was to disappear. To vanish beneath the waves was to be reborn. Unseen, untouchable. In the early years of the war, that faith held true. The U-boats were hunters, the sea their shield. They ruled the Atlantic with mathematics, stealth, and silence. Destroyers searched, depth charges thundered, but the ocean always welcomed them back into its darkness. That darkness felt like home, a place no bomb, no human could reach. Until March 25th, 1944. Morning over the Bay of Biscay. Gray light, low clouds, the air heavy with salt. Captain Werner Hanky stood on the conning tower of U-976. His crew scanned the horizon through mist and drizzle. It was a routine patrol, a simple transfer run near Saint-Nazaire. At 9:30, hydrophones picked up faint engine noise, distant, northern. 2 aircraft, maybe 3. Nothing unusual. Since 1943, Allied planes had haunted these skies, but crash diving had always saved them. The captain watched the lookouts descend the ladder, then gave the order that had saved hundreds before him. Alarm! Crash dive! The klaxon wailed through the narrow corridors. Diesels shut down, electric motors hummed, ballast tanks filled. U-976 began her descent, the sea closing over the periscope. It should have been safety, but this time, it wasn't. The aircraft approaching from the northeast were Mosquito FB Mark 18, nicknamed Tsetse, after the African fly with the fatal bite. Their bodies were made of wood, a detail German pilots once mocked, furniture with engines. But inside that wooden nose was something entirely new. A 57-millimeter Mullins gun, modified from an anti-tank cannon. It was fed by an automatic loader built not by a weapons factory, but by a British cigarette machine company. That absurd combination, wood, brass, and cigarette gears, had created a weapon that fired 55 armor-piercing shells per minute, each leaving the barrel at 890 meters per second. During tests in Scotland, British engineers had discovered something that German scientists insisted was impossible, that with the right shape and velocity, a projectile could travel through water and remain lethal. They proved it with math, film, and wreckage. And on that cold March morning, they proved it with blood. At 9:37, the first Mosquito dived from 1,500 meters at a 30-degree angle. Flight Officer Turner's voice over the intercom was calm, steady, surgical. Range 1,400 meters, tracers on, hold course. His navigator lined up the shot. 6 shells, each the weight of a human heart, each meant for one target, the pressure hull of U-976. The first shell hit the water 20 meters ahead of the diving submarine. Instead of slowing, it sliced downward, its velocity dropping from 890 to about 600 meters per second. But that was still enough to punch through 19 millimeters of steel plating. Inside the control room, There was no warning, just a thunderclap of implosion. The torpedo room filled with white water and screams. Pressure burst open the doors. Charts dissolved into pulp. Men who had survived 40 patrols were torn apart by fragments smaller than a coin. By 9:42, 5 minutes after the first shell, U-976 settled on the seabed, 27 meters down. 38 men dead. 14 survived, floating in an oil-slick sea, watching the wooden Mosquito circle above them like a ghost. The attack had lasted less than 7 minutes. The war for the sea had changed forever. In Carnival, Admiral Karl Dönitz read the first reports with disbelief. He had built his empire on precision and repetition, on rules that had kept men alive for years. Every formula, every textbook, every training manual insisted that water's density would stop any shell within centimeters. It was not opinion, it was physics. Now physics itself had betrayed him. He wrote in his notebook, "If the British have found a way for shells to pierce water, then they have found a way to pierce the heart of the U-boat war." But no one around him dared say the word defeat. Instead, they called it an anomaly, a lucky shot, a rumor exaggerated by panic. Even as more boats disappeared in the Bay of Biscay, the command refused to believe what their men already knew, that the sea no longer protected them. In April 1944, new words began appearing in naval medical reports. Mosquito, neurosis. Sailors woke from nightmares screaming, claiming they could hear twin-engine sounds echoing through the hull even when submerged. One officer refused to enter the conning tower again. Another tried to block the vents, shouting that the water was whispering. Doctors called it combat stress. The crews called it the sound of death coming through water. In the canteens of Lorient and Brest, men spoke in half sentences, their eyes darting toward the ceiling whenever a plane passed overhead. The bravest still sailed, but even they carried something heavier than torpedoes. Doubt the Maline's gun was more than a cannon. It was a paradox, a weapon that shouldn't have worked, born from factories that had nothing to do with war. In Hamburg, German engineers tried to replicate the design. They failed. Precision machining, special steel alloys, the unique auto-loading feed. None of it could be copied with the resources Germany had left. They dismissed it as technically unfeasible. Yet every few weeks, another U-boat failed to return. By May, the words Tsetse attack became common in radio decrypts. British intelligence even leaked reports deliberately, feeding the fear, turning a weapon into a legend. The Germans called it der Weißbiss, the white bite, because when the 57mm shell hit water, it left a pale flash. Beautiful, silent, final. By the end of spring 1944, the Kriegsmarine's Atlantic strategy was already collapsing. What had begun as a campaign of domination was becoming a ritual of attrition. The Allies no longer needed fleets of destroyers or endless depth charges. A few wooden planes with unthinkable weapons had undone an entire doctrine. Inside the bases, the mood turned sepulchral. Officers avoided each other's eyes. Messages from Dönitz ended with the same phrase: "Continue the fight. Maintain faith in the sea." But there was no faith left to maintain. The crews still saluted, still dove, still prayed. But deep inside they knew. The ocean that once gave them safety was now a mirror reflecting their end. Every age of warfare ends with a silence, the pause before men realize that their weapons no longer matter. For the U-boat force, that silence began here. In the gray waters of Biscay, in the 5 minutes between the first impact and the last breath of U-976, the entire foundation of submarine warfare cracked. It would take months for the command to admit it, but the men already understood. They would dive again, fight again, yet every time they heard the echo of a twin-engine hum, they would remember that even the sea could lie. The age of hunters was over. The hunted had begun to drown. After U-976, fear was no longer abstract. It had a sound, a smell, a shape. The sound was the growl of twin engines above the clouds. The smell was burnt oil spreading over salt water. The shape, a thin black shadow falling from the sky and vanishing into the sea. Every crew leaving Lorient now received a new order. If detected on the surface, dive immediately. Do not fight. To commanders, it sounded reasonable. To their men, it was an admission that battle itself was pointless. They once looked up at the sky, believing skill in the steel could resist anything. Now they looked down, praying the water would be deep enough to hide them. In April 1944, Kriegsmarine medical files recorded a new diagnosis: mosquito syndrome. Symptoms: insomnia, reflex panic at engine sounds, nightmares of diving. Even on shore leave, men flinched at motorbikes, hearing Merlins in every engine. One report from a naval hospital in Brest reads, "Patient believes aircraft can see through water, suffers sweating, palpitations, hallucinated sounds of shells passing through steel." Doctors called it combat stress. Sailors called it the sound of a curse. In his diary, engineer Dieter Krantz wrote, "We once feared bombs, but bombs had rules. The mosquito does not. It appears, fires, and leaves no echo." March 29, 1944. At Carnival headquarters, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz reads the official loss summary of U-976. A photograph lies on his desk. A hull plate with a perfect round hole, its edges burnt and folded inward. He stares for minutes without speaking. Then he writes one line in his logbook: "If shells pierce water, then the war beneath it is over." But wars do not pause for truth. That night he gathers his staff and orders technical countermeasures. Ideas flow. Thicker plating around the conning tower, heavier flak guns, faster dives, all dismissed within hours. Too heavy, too slow, too late. The engineers speak in equations. The admiral hears only futility. Early April 1944. ERAF Coastal Command launches its new tactic, the Tsetse pair. One mosquito attacks, the other films and guides. April 5th, 15 minutes, 2 U-boats sunk, 3 damaged. Depth less than 20 meters. German stations at Brest intercept broken SOS bursts. Attacked from air. Shells underwater. Cannot respond. Each dot and dash is a death sentence for Dönitz's doctrine. In submarine pens, men begin to joke bitterly. We used to dive to live. Now we dive to wait for death. Concrete walls 2 meters thick once felt invincible. Now they echo with silence. No one volunteers for daylight patrols. Boats leave only at night and remain submerged all day, draining their batteries, slowing their voyages. The fleet is paralyzed not by bombs, but by the loss of belief. April alone, 12 U-boats lost, 8 damaged, nearly 600 men gone. Only 18 Mosquito FBMK-18 operate in theater. Each averages 1 kill per week, but statistics mean nothing to the men who surface each night and see the sky burn. A sailor writes home, "We have already lost. Not because they are smarter, but because they believed in change while we believed in rules." The British understand that fear is a weapon. Whenever a U-boat is destroyed, propaganda leaflets follow. Death comes from above and below. The mosquito sees through water. No one knows how these papers reach the fortified bases. Perhaps airdropped, perhaps smuggled. It doesn't matter, they work. Recruits refuse assignments. Veterans stare at the floor. A naval psychologist records a conversation. "There is no war anymore," a lieutenant says. "Only the question of how death will find us." At the Waffenamt laboratory in Hamburg, engineers search for salvation. Concrete coatings around the conning tower. Rubber layers to absorb impact. Explosive plates that detonate outward to deflect incoming shells. All fail. One engineer admits in a classified memo, "We are using the 19th century to fight the 20th. The final recommendation reads simply, stay submerged as long as possible." Science had no answer left, only surrender disguised as procedure. Werner Hanky, one of 14 rescued from U-976, is summoned to Berlin. He describes everything: trajectory, sound, the moment of implosion. A general interrupts, "You panicked. Likely a mine." 3 days later, film from divers shows the hull. Round holes, edges curled inward, metal scorched. Silence fills the room. Hanky says quietly, "Do you believe me now? The sea is no longer ours." He is neither punished nor praised, only dismissed. A man who survived what no one wants to name. By May 1944, Dönitz orders new regulations. No daylight transit through Biscay, reduced surface speed, adoption of the snorkel. The snorkel lets diesels breathe while submerged, but the thin pipe breaks the surface like a flag of surrender. Radar detects it instantly. What was meant to save them now betrays their position. Every invention becomes a trap. Every hope, a target. The world once believed Germany led in engineering, but in 1944, that truth reversed. A cigarette machine company out-innovated its navy. A furniture maker built a plane faster than Luftwaffe fighters. Technology no longer served ideology, it judged it, and its verdict was simple: adapt or die. June 1944, the Allied invasion begins. Dönitz orders a mass counterattack. 60 U-boats to strike the Normandy fleet. Only 16 leave harbor. 7 are lost within a week, most to aircraft. None reach the beaches. A commander writes, "We once made the ocean fear us. Now the ocean fears them, and we fear ourselves." The British understand that terror travels faster than torpedoes. They do not hide the Tsetse gun. They advertise it. Newspapers call it the Sea Piercer. Leaflets show a Mosquito diving toward a submerged U-boat, captioned, "Death from above and below." No shell is needed. The image alone pierces hearts. By summer's end, 40 crews refuse deployment for psychological reasons. An elite force dissolves without a battle. What died with U-976 was not a boat, but a worldview. For years, the Kriegsmarine believed in laws of physics and obedience. But war is human, and humans imagine. When the British imagined a gun that could shoot through water, they did more than defy engineering. They shattered the German faith that everything had limits. A historian later wrote, "The day the Moulins gun fired in anger, Germany did not lose a ship, it lost its invincibility." By late 1944, the Biscay had no color. Oil and ash stained its surface. Radar beams painted it with light. Even on quiet days, the water seemed to listen. A sailor wrote, "The sea used to be our friend. Now it watches us like a judge. Each wave against the hull sounds like gunfire. Each silence like a verdict." September 1944. Dönitz moves his headquarters to Norway, the last coast still under his control. He believes the north is safe. It isn't. British radar reaches Trondheim. Mosquitoes follow. The night before his departure, he writes, "I believed in depth. Now I know no depth can hide human error." He does not yet know that within months, those same planes will hunt his last boats through Norwegian fjords. The death of U-976 was not an episode. It was an axis. From that moment, the U-boat war no longer attacked. It endured. Each patrol was a sentence, each survivor a ghost of a belief. When the Germans realized that water no longer protected them, they also realized something greater. No law of warfare lasts forever. The sea, once their shield, had become their mirror. And in that mirror they saw not defeat, but the reflection of their own certainty dying. By the summer of 1944, hell had changed its place. It was no longer above the waves, it lived inside the men who sailed beneath them. They had once trusted in physics, in steel, in procedure. Now, none of those could save them from the echo inside their own heads. A submarine could hide 200 meters deep. It could escape radar, dodge sonar, outlast air patrols, but it could not escape the sound of memory. The scream of a molten shell cutting through steel, the sudden hiss of air and seawater colliding in the dark. In the bases from Brest to Trondheim, veterans sat quietly, smoking in silence, staring at nothing. When someone asked, "Have you seen it?" nobody answered. They only looked down as if the question itself was a bullet. In July 1944, an internal Kriegsmarine memorandum used a phrase no one had dared to write before. Das Wasser ist nicht mehr auf unserer Seite. The water is no longer on our side. It was not Allied propaganda. It was written by German officers. One engineer in Lorient confessed, "I spent my life perfecting the dive sequence. Faster, deeper, safer. But what's the point of diving if the shells follow you down?" The sea, once their sanctuary, had become an accomplice of death. Every dive now felt like a betrayal. After U-976, every patrol became a funeral waiting to begin. There were no more victories to chase, only orders to maintain presence. U-415, U-821, U-960, names reduced to numbers on a chalkboard. Each followed the same script: detected, dived, lost contact, never returned. A surviving crewman later said, "We stopped measuring distance to the enemy. We measured distance to the moment of death." Inside a U-boat, space was smaller than a city tram. 50 men recycled air, sweating steel. The walls sweated too, condensation dripping like time itself. Every unfamiliar sound, a creak, a metallic click, froze the crew. One night, at 80 meters depth, a young seaman screamed that he could hear propellers. The twin-engine beat of a Mosquito overhead. The commander checked the hydrophones. Nothing. Silence. Only the young man's trembling voice. "It's up there. It's waiting." The doctor later called it acoustic hallucination under pressure. The men simply called it the sound of memory returning. Hell wasn't below them anymore. It was within. August 1944, Saint-Nazaire. A machinist named Karl Brenner, age 23, survived a Tsetse attack. 3 days later, he locked himself in his cabin, shouting, "Don't open the hatch! Don't let the water in!" When they broke down the door, he was unconscious, his hands bleeding from clawing at the bulkhead. Diagnosis: paranoid reaction triggered by diving alarm. Among sailors, they began calling it the U disease. No cure. 2 pass out, shore leave for life, or death on the next patrol. September 1944, deep inside an abandoned bunker near Paris, a special session convened. Naval doctors, psychologists, engineers. Topic: mental condition of U-boat crews. No one wanted to begin. Finally, a colonel said, "We can build more submarines, but we cannot rebuild belief." A scientist murmured, "If the sea once protected them, now the sea is drowning them." The report concluded with a single line: "Morale cannot be restored under current conditions." October 1944. Every night over the Bay of Biscay, flashes of light ripped through the horizon. Thin, pale, silent. The crews call them white ghosts. It's the tracer from a 57mm shell. A streak that glows and dies before sound can follow. A survivor describes it. "It was like watching the sea being sliced open and then stitched back together." The British called it accuracy. The Germans called it haunting. In every command post, the same 2 lines repeat on teletypes. No contact. Missing since. Once the bases roared with the thunder of engines. Now they echo with the hum of air pumps and dripping water. Signals officers transmit, receive, erase. The rhythm of futility. The Atlantic War becomes a dialogue with silence. In Hamburg, an aging naval engineer is summoned to Berlin to explain the failures. When asked why Germany cannot counter the Molin's gun, he answers quietly, "Because they understand water better than we do." He lists the tests, impact angles, hull thickness, pressure levels, and then shrugs. "We trusted steel. They trusted physics." He pauses. "We believed the sea was ours. They learned to speak its language." It is the most painful confession of the entire war. In Bremen, Flensburg, Wilhelmshaven, groups of ex-sailors sit in taverns saying little. They call themselves the men from below. One of them says, "We were hunters once. Now when I hear waves, I think of steel breaking." Many never return to the sea. Some never return from the war at all. Their bodies alive, their minds still drowning. By winter 1944, everyone knows the war is lost. But Dönitz orders, "U-boats must continue operations. The enemy must never command the entire sea." It is no longer strategy, it is ritual. Captains obey, not out of faith, but out of fear of shame. U-2511, U-3008, U-1105. The last generation sent out on what everyone calls final voyages. A commander writes in his log, "We sail to prove that loyalty still exists, even when reason has died." By early 1945, the northern waters turned gray. Not blue, not green, just gray. Oil slicks stain the waves. Clouds hang low like smoke. Even on quiet days, the ocean feels alive, watching, remembering. A sailor whispers, "We used to say the sea was our friend. Now it looks at us like we don't belong." Each splash against the hull sounds like an accusation. Each silence feels heavier than depth. February 1945, off the coast of Norway, a U-boat surfaces to recharge batteries. Crewmen hear a faint hum, but radar shows nothing. No aircraft, no enemy. 1 minute later, light flashes across the water. A shell strikes. The boat vanishes in seconds. A survivor recalls, "We never saw the enemy. We only saw ourselves in the reflection of the water." They call it the night of truth. After that, no one believes survival is possible. Even on land, fear spreads. Recruits refuse to enter training pools. Bathhouses empty. In Berlin, cadets panic when engine noises play over loudspeakers during drills. One instructor writes, "Half the class jumped out of the water screaming 57. The war no longer needs the ocean. It lives inside their veins. By March 1945, only a handful of U-boats remain active in Norway. Veterans now train the young. Men barely 20, their eyes bright with illusions already dying. One trainer admits, "Every time I see them bored, I know they won't return. Yet I still teach them how to survive, even though I no longer wish to." It is the final cruelty of war, the living teaching others how to die slower. March 1945. Berlin burns. At Trondheim, a small group of sailors watch the horizon. They know it is over. One says quietly, "The sea is still there, but it is no longer for us." No one replies, and only the wind answers. And beneath it, the faintest echo of engines, as if memory itself is circling above them one last time. The defeat of the U-boat force is not a military collapse, it is a spiritual one. The men are still alive, but something inside them has already sunk beyond rescue. British technology had pierced more than hulls and doctrines. It pierced the very idea of safety, the belief that depth could protect. The Germans once said, "We command the deep." After 1944, they learned no one commands what can change its allegiance. Hell is not below the ocean. It is within those who remember how it used to protect them, and who must now live knowing it never will again. There are no alarms now, no commands to dive, No rush of boots down ladders. Only silence. The North Sea lies still, like a field after harvest. At Trondheim, the last functioning base of the U-boat fleet, the massive bunker doors stay shut. No engines hum inside. The smell of diesel and oil, once the heartbeat of the war, is fading. The sea, which once carried thousands of patrols, now carries only echoes. Men walk the docks and listen to the wind move through the empty pens. They are no longer warriors. They are witnesses to an empire sinking beneath its own weight. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, once called the father of the U-boats, now sits alone in his office at Flensburg. Outside, Berlin burns. Inside, the air smells of damp paper and defeat. On his desk lie the last reports. 784 submarines destroyed since 1939. Over 30,000 sailors lost at sea. 7 out of every 10 never returned. He looks at a wall map of the Atlantic dash. So many red pins marking loss that the blue of the ocean can barely be seen. He murmurs to no one, "We have killed our own sanctuary." It is the truest sentence he will ever say. May 1st, 1945. News reaches Flensburg. Hitler is dead. A nation without a leader turns to the man of the sea. Dönitz is named successor. The next morning he gathers the surviving officers. His voice, once a weapon, now trembles. Germany has lost, but the honor of those who served will not. He signs his final command. All U-boats still operational must cease hostilities, surface, and surrender. No one cries, no one cheers. The order feels like something already understood, something the sea itself had whispered for months. May 4th, 1945. From the North Sea to the Atlantic, 154 U-boats rise to the surface. Steel hulls emerge through the gray dawn, rusted, leaking, covered in salt and silence. One after another they appear, as if the ocean is returning the dead. No engines roar, no guns fire. The men stand on deck, arms raised, eyes fixed on the water. An RAF pilot watching from above radios in disbelief. They're surfacing by themselves. It's as if the sea is pushing them up. The ocean, for the first time in 6 years, is still. It has opened its eyes and it sees everything. British pilots circle overhead, filming the procession. On camera, the submarines look like rusted beasts rising for air. A pilot remarks, "They look like corpses learning to breathe again." The surrender is not theatrical. It is quiet, a ritual of exhaustion. The crews stand motionless. Some smile faintly, not from joy, but from relief that the water will no longer judge them. Others cannot look down, afraid of what stares back from below. Among the captured is Werner Hanky, the man who once commanded U-976. He is older now, gaunt, gray, almost transparent. Reporters surround him. One asks, "Do you regret what you did?" He pauses, then says simply, "No, but I no longer believe in the sea." It is not bitterness, it is confession. After the surrender, Dönitz orders the Regenbogen operation, Rainbow. The code means one thing: scuttle the boats rather than hand them over. More than 200 U-boats are deliberately sunk by their own crews. They open valves, flood ballast tanks, stand silently as their ships descend. An Allied observer writes, "They didn't destroy them in anger. They sank them as if apologizing to the ocean." The water closes over the conning towers without a ripple. The sea accepts their offering, coldly, wordlessly. After 1945, those who survive return to a country in ruins. But there are no parades, no medals, no welcome. In cafes and train stations, they sit alone, their uniforms stripped of insignia. They no longer call themselves sailors. They are men without waves. One becomes a fisherman, another repairs bicycles. But every time they hear a motor, they stop breathing for a second, waiting for the drone of engines that once ruled their lives. For them, peace is not silence. It is an echo they can't escape. Years later, historians return to the Bay of Biscay, the graveyard of the U-boats. The sea there is calm, but deceptive. Under the surface, dozens of wrecks sleep intact. They call it the mirror of war, because here in these waters, humanity once saw its reflection. The moment when faith in machinery drowned in the truth of imagination. The sea didn't betray anyone, it simply told the truth. It reflected exactly what men had put into it: arrogance, precision, and a belief that nature could be controlled. The ocean does not take sides, it only remembers. The phrase "dive to survive," once the cornerstone of German naval training, is erased from manuals after the war. In the post-war Bundesmarine, cadets study the same charts, the same physics, the same depth curves. But a new sentence appears on page 1. There is no absolute safety below the surface. That is the legacy of U-976. A boat that died in 18 seconds but buried a belief that had lived for generations. In a 1960 interview, an elderly Werner Hanky is asked, "What sound stays with you most from the war?" He looks down before answering. The sound of water. When it hits steel, it doesn't scream, it whispers. It tells you, you believed the wrong thing. The studio falls silent, a man speaking to ghosts, his voice steady, his eyes elsewhere. Decades pass. Divers exploring the Bay of Biscay find the wreck of U-976. It lies upright, shrouded in coral and rust. The torpedo doors hang open. The interior is perfectly preserved, as if waiting for the order to dive again. No one touches it. The divers rise slowly, whispering the same words every visitor leaves behind. Rest, you lost to yourselves. In 1958, archives in Kiel uncover a sealed envelope, never mailed. The writer, Lieutenant Dieter Kranz, chief engineer of U-976. He died in March 1944. The letter was addressed to his mother. Dear Mother, if I do not return, know that the sea did not betray me. We were the ones who stopped listening. The sea speaks slowly, and men are always in a hurry. The letter is displayed in the Naval Museum under a plaque that reads, Message from the Deep. Writers begin to speak of the memory of water. One German novelist writes, if the sea remembers, it remembers everything. Every scream, every implosion, every prayer that dissolved in salt. But what it remembers most, he says, is the moment when men stopped doubting themselves. And the ocean had to remind them that doubt is survival. In the U-boat memorial at Kiel, the inscription reads, they lived in depths where light cannot reach, yet truth still found them. Today, the sea around Biscay looks ordinary. Blue, restless, beautiful. Fishermen still cast their nets, unaware of the tombs beneath them. But on certain mornings when the tide is low and the fog thin, a shadow appears under the water. The outline of a conning tower, frozen mid-ascent. It rises only for a second before vanishing again. The locals call it the last witness. Whether real or imagined, it is the ocean's way of saying it remembers. At naval academies around the world, when officers study submarine warfare, the first case they learn is U-976. Not for tactics, but for the lesson behind it. Faith without doubt is fatal. Technology without humility destroys its master. And the sea, patient, impartial, infinite, always waits for men to forget those truths. When the Germans believed the water was their ally, they stopped learning. When the British doubted, they invented. In 18 seconds, imagination defeated certainty. The ocean belongs to no one. Not to Germany, not to Britain, not to victory. It is a mirror, reflecting human ambition, and the cost of believing it can never break. The U-boats once thought they commanded the deep, but the deep was never theirs to command. The Mosquito, the Maline's gun, the flash of white light. They were not just weapons, they were reminders. that every age ends the same way, when men forget to listen to the sea. And on that gray morning in 1944, when a wooden plane fired a single 57-millimeter shell through water, it did more than sink a submarine. It shattered a nation's certainty and made the ocean, for the first time, truly human.